Okay, so polynomials over the rational field. In the previous section, we have already discussed polynomials but over any field. Now we are restricting our study by restricting the coefficients to come from the rational field. Now in this section, we will be primarily interested in polynomials whose coefficients are actually not just any rational numbers but rather integers, and we will be mainly concerned with irreducibility or reducibility of such polynomials. So let us start this section with this definition. Let fx equal to a0 plus a1x plus etc plus an to the power n be a polynomial where these coefficients are integers. We say that fx is a primitive polynomial if the greatest common divisor of these coefficients is 1. Okay, so if their GCD is, it turns out to be equal to 1, then such a polynomial is called a primitive polynomial. Note two things. The first thing is that primitivity, this definition applies only to polynomials where the coefficients are integers, and also this definition does not apply on the zero polynomial, because we should be able to have a GCD of the coefficients. So if all of them are 0, there is no GCD. So at least one of them has to be non-zero. Okay. So now right after this definition, there is this basic result. Lemma 3.10.1. It says that if we multiply two primitive polynomials, then we again get a primitive polynomial. If fx and gx are primitive polynomials, then fx gx is also a primitive polynomial. Okay. Now the proof is by contradiction. We start the proof by assuming expressions for fx and gx. Let fx equal to a0 plus a1x etc plus anx to the power n and gx equal to b0 plus b1x plus be say mx to the power m, where the ai's and bj's are all integers, and because of primitivity of fx and gx, their respective GCDs are both equal to 1. Now our aim is to prove that fx gx is primitive, so we suppose the contrary, that is fx gx is not primitive. If it is not primitive means what? That if we consider all its coefficients, it will also have integer coefficients, because after all we are multiplying two integer polynomials, so we are going to get an integer polynomial. So its coefficients, their GCD is not equal to 1. That's what being not primitive means. So that means their GCD is greater than 1, so the GCD will divide all the coefficients of fx gx, and since the GCD is greater than 1, by the fundamental theorem of arithmetic, the GCD will have its own prime divisors. There will be at least one prime which divides the GCD, so that prime will also divide all the coefficients. Then all the coefficients of fx times gx are divisible by some integer greater than 1, and hence by some prime number p. I need some ink. So we now have the fact that all the coefficients of fx gx are divisible by some prime number p. But now we concentrate on fx and gx separately. Each one of them is given primitive. Since fx is primitive, p does not divide all of these coefficients of fx, a0, a1, etc. Okay, because their GCD is 1, because fx is primitive. So there will be some ai that is not divisible by p, and because of that there will be a smallest value of the index ak, suppose a smallest k for which ak is not divisible by p. So there exists a smallest non-negative integer P does not divide a k. Similarly, since gx is also primitive, so there will be a smallest non-negative integer j such that P does not divide bj. Okay. Now the coefficient Cj plus k of x to the power j plus k in this product fx gx by the definition of multiplication of two polynomials, this coefficient can be written like this. In fact, the coefficient is equal to, you already know the formula. We are going to write it slightly differently. We are going to put some terms together. AK bj, this is somewhere middle in that sum that defines the coefficient of a product of two polynomials. The other terms in that sum are like this: ak plus 1 b j minus 1 plus ak plus 2b j minus 2 plus etc. a k plus j b naught plus there are other terms. I mean, you can see here that the suffix of a is increasing. It increases, it takes the maximum value k plus j and then it stops here, but the suffixes will also decrease from k. So that's why I said it's a term in the middle of the sum, somewhere in the middle. So the other remaining terms will look like this. Now here correspondingly the suffixes of b decreased, now they will increase. J plus 1 plus ak minus 2b j plus 2 etc. plus a naught b j plus k. Okay, the rule is that in any term in this full thing, if you add the suffixes, you should get j plus k. See, k plus j, k plus 1 plus j minus 1, plus 1 and minus 1 cancel out, you are left with j plus k and so on with the other terms also. But one question may arise in your mind. The thing is that we are taking both the suffixes of a as well as b to j plus k. Now we don't really know what k and j are. They have just been chosen to be smallest non-negative integers for which some non-divisibility relations are true. It may happen that j plus k exceeds, say here it is appearing as the suffix of b, say j plus k is greater than m, or some previous smaller suffix also becomes greater than m, or for that matter k plus j here becomes greater than n. What meaning will then these terms have? To get rid of that problem, you think of the polynomials like this. In fact, we discussed about this thing when we first defined polynomials. A polynomial looks like this. However, every polynomial can be thought of as having infinitely many terms, at most finitely many of which have non-zero coefficients. So after this bm, we actually have bm plus 1, bm plus 2, all those things are there, but they are 0. So you can consider this sum like that. And in fact, we have also seen there that if we interpret a polynomial like that, having infinitely many terms, finitely many of which have non-zero coefficients, then the definition of the product is unaffected. In fact, it should remain unaffected if you really think about that. Because if you take some extra zero terms and conventionally multiply, that is how you used to multiply in school, then those zero terms will not affect the final result. So you can make sense of these terms in case any such coefficient exceeds the limit as 0. Okay. Now these terms you see here in the first sum within this bracket, the terms ak plus 1, ak plus 2, ak plus j, these are not really important. The important terms are the b terms, where the suffix is less than j, and in the second sum the important terms are the a terms, where the suffixes are less than k. We will see why. Since p divides, okay, what is k? K is the smallest non-negative integer such that p does not divide ak. So if we manage to have some integers which are non-negative and smaller than k, then p will divide the corresponding the corresponding terms. So that means what we are trying to say here is that p divides a naught, p divides a1, p divides a k minus 1, because k is the stage from which non-divisibility starts. You cannot say that all the ak plus 1, all of them are not divisible by p. We are not saying that. We are just saying that k is the smallest for which this relation is true. So any smaller value of the suffix will have divisibility, will give you divisibility. So since all of these are divisible by p, we have, so the second sum is divisible by p, ak minus 1, j plus 1, etc. Because of tight space, let me just write two terms. So this is one thing. Like that, j is the smallest for which p divides bj. So any smaller suffix p, p does not divide bj. For any smaller suffix than j, p will divide the b, that suffix. So since p divides b naught, b1, etc. P divides b naught, p divides b1, etc. P divides b, j minus 1 we have P now dividing the first sum, that is ak plus 1 bj minus 1 etc. a k plus j b naught. This is the other conclusion. So this first sum is divisible by P and so is the second sum. But at the same time P also divides C j plus k. That comes from our supposition, okay, that P divides the coefficients, all the coefficients of fx gx. The supposition that fx gx is not primitive has given us a prime P that divides all of its coefficients. So in particular P also divides this Cj plus k. Also P divides Cj plus k. This implies P divides, okay, so then P has to divide this term akbj. Since P is prime, we have P divides ak or P divides bj. Okay, and wait a minute, let me just see one thing. Yeah, okay. But we already have that P does not divide ak and it does not divide bj. So this is a contradiction. And this contradiction shows that our supposition is wrong. That is, fx gx must be a primitive polynomial, or fx gx must be primitive. So that completes the proof. Okay, so we have seen what a primitive polynomial means, that the GCD of its coefficients is 1, and if we multiply two primitive polynomials then we again get a primitive polynomial. Now related to this definition of primitivity, there is another more general definition. So next is that definition. Let fx be a polynomial with integer coefficients. The greatest common divisor of the coefficients is said to be the content of the polynomial fx. Clearly given any polynomial fx with integer coefficients we can write fx equal to d times px, where d is the content of fx and px is a primitive polynomial. Do you see what we have here? Say we consider the polynomial 2x cubed minus 6. Okay, so think of this in place of fx. This is a polynomial with integer coefficients. Now the content of this polynomial is the greatest common divisor of the coefficients, that is 2 and minus 6. But when we calculate the GCD of integers, sign does not matter. According to our convention that the GCD is supposed to be by definition a positive integer, so we can neglect the sign. So the GCD in this case is 2. So you can take 2, so the content is 2, so you can take 2 common out. You can do that because 2 is the greatest common divisor, so it divides both the coefficients. If you have more coefficients, then their content will also divide all of the coefficients because it is common divisor. Now after taking that common out, you are left with this. So you can see that this is the content and this is a primitive polynomial, because according to the definition of primitivity, it's a polynomial where the coefficients have greatest common divisor 1. In other words, a primitive polynomial is a polynomial whose content is equal to 1. So any polynomial can always be written as a product of its content and a primitive polynomial. So that's what we said here, and this will be important in the next theorem. Although it is called theorem, but it has a name also. It's called Gauss lemma, named after the famous mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss. Mathematician, physicist, astronomer, he was a polymath. You may have encountered Gauss's name in physics also. The statement is this: if the primitive polynomial fx can be, see, the moment we say primitive polynomial, it automatically means that it's a polynomial with integer coefficients. Now if such a polynomial can be factored as a product of two polynomials with rational coefficients, then it can be factored as a product of two polynomials with integer coefficients. Okay, now note one thing carefully, that fx is not just any polynomial with integer coefficients. It's a primitive polynomial with integer coefficients, that is a polynomial whose content is equal to 1. This primitivity will force this result. So we start by considering the thing that they have taken as hypothesis. If fx can be factored as a product of two polynomials with rational coefficients. So let fx be equal to ux times vx, where ux comma vx are polynomials with rational coefficients. Now we are going to write a line whose meaning we will discuss. We will elaborate this by clearing of denominators and taking common terms out, or what is the exact, common factors, and taking out, this is author's language, we have fx is equal to a divided by b times lambda x times mu x, where a and b are positive integers and lambda x comma mu x are primitive polynomials. What is it that we have done here? From this, how are we getting something like this, and what does it even mean? For that, let us take one example. Say we are not going to, that is the example we will take. There the product will not necessarily be a primitive polynomial, but we just want to know how we are getting this form from this form. So what we are going to do, we will take two concrete polynomials ux and vx, each having rational coefficients, and then from that we will try to make sense of this. So let us take this product, say 1 by 2 x cube minus 3 by 4. So this is ux, and vx is say 1 by 3 x plus say 27 divided by 12. So if it's 27 by 12, then there are common factors. So let us take 27 divided by 11. So suppose this is ux and this is vx. Now what is it that we are doing here? By clearing of denominators, by that we just simply mean the thing that we normally do when we encounter sums or differences of fractions. We take the LCM of the denominator and then we simplify the expression. For 2x cube minus 3, okay, times, here we will have 33, so 11x plus 81, 1 divided by 4 times 33, 2x cube minus 3, 11x plus 81. This is our A, this is B, this is lambda x, and this is mu x. So clearing of denominator means actually this, and taking out common factors. Although we don't have any common factor here, it may happen that these polynomials that we have after doing this kind of thing, after performing these operations, these polynomials may have content more than one. If that is the case, then the content has to be taken out, writing the given polynomial as its content times a primitive polynomial. That polynomial will be one of the primitive polynomials. You do that with the other one. Here the original polynomials we have got after this step, they themselves are primitive polynomials, that is they have, each one of them has content 1. So we did not have to take common terms out. So by writing like this, this is what we mean. Okay, this can always be done. And one more thing you may see, it may happen that the numerator and denominator or any one of them may be a negative integer. Maybe. If such a thing happens, then you can always shift the minus sign from any one of them. If any one of them is minus, then you shift the minus sign to one of these polynomials. Since the polynomials are originally primitive, multiplying them by -1 will not change their primitivity. Why? Being primitive means if you take the GCD of their coefficients, that is equal to 1. Now multiplying a polynomial by -1 means changing the sign of all of its coefficients, but sign change does not affect greatest common divisor. So primitive lambda x will continue to be primitive if you consider minus lambda x. So that's why we can always choose a and b to be positive integers. Okay, so now from here we again continue the proof. We need positivity of a and b, you will realize why. Thus, let's use this space also. B times fx is equal to a times lambda x times mu x. Since fx is primitive, fx is given to be primitive, that's how we started this theorem. Since fx is primitive, the content of this left hand side polynomial is b. The fact that we can write the content is b is because we have taken b to be a positive integer. The content by definition is the GCD of the coefficients of the polynomial, and GCD by its definition is a positive integer. So that's why we need b to be positive, and that's why we will also need a to be positive. Since lambda x and mu x are both primitive, so the previous lemma implies that their product is also primitive. And so the content of a times lambda x times mu x is a. Now you look at this equality. This equation tells us that these two polynomials are the same, so their contents should also be the same. That means b must be equal to a. And this comes from the fact that the content of a polynomial is unique. A polynomial cannot have two different contents. Since bfx is equal to a lambda x mu x, we thus have b equal to a. Hence fx equal to a by b times lambda x times mu x is equal to lambda x times mu x. So you can see that we have expressed fx as a product of two polynomials with integer coefficients, and that's what we wanted to show. So this completes the proof of Gauss' lemma. Now after Gauss lemma, we have one more definition. This is going to be important in what we will see ultimately. A polynomial is said to be integer monic if its coefficients are all integers and the highest coefficient is 1. Highest coefficient means the coefficient having the highest degree term. Thus, an integer monic polynomial is of this form, is of the form x to the power n. This is the highest term, so its coefficient is 1 plus a1 x to the power n minus 1, etc. goes like this to a n, where these are integers. Now note one thing. Any integer monic polynomial is primitive. This is because the presence of this one of the coefficients is equal to 1, so the GCD of the coefficients is bound to be equal to 1, and hence every integer monic polynomial is primitive. The converse, however, is clearly not true. For example, this is a primitive polynomial which is not integer monic. The highest degree term has coefficient 2, which is not equal to 1. Now with this new definition, we have a corollary to Gauss lemma, and the corollary goes like this. If an integer monic polynomial factors as a product of two polynomials with rational coefficients Then so the beginning of this lemma is just like Gauss lemma. In Gauss lemma we started with a primitive polynomial which, if it is factorizable as a product of two polynomials with rational coefficients, then the conclusion is that it is also factorizable as a product of two polynomials with integer coefficients. Here the beginning is an integer monic polynomial. If that is factorizable as a product of two rational polynomials, then here the conclusion is that not only is it factorizable as a product of two integer polynomials, but they can also be chosen as integer monic in fact. Then it factors as a product of two integer monic polynomials. Now the proof is not given in the text, it's left to us as an exercise. So let us see the proof. It should not be very difficult. I have vaguely thought about it, but let's just see if we can write a proof. Let fx be an integer monic polynomial, and it is factorizable as a product of two polynomials with rational coefficients. So let fx be equal to, just like Gauss lemma, ux times vx, where ux and vx are with rational coefficients. Okay, now we are able to, at this stage we are able to use Gauss lemma. Why? Because fx being integer monic is also primitive, that we have already seen before. Here, note that any integer monic polynomial is primitive. Since fx is primitive, Gauss lemma implies fx equal to lambda x mu x, where, okay, now I think so from Gauss lemma we can only say that lambda x and mu x are integer polynomials, but we also have to conclude somehow that either they are monic polynomials, or we can arrange things in such a way that fx is a product of two integer monic polynomials. So we need expressions for lambda x and mu x. Okay, since this is a different corollary and we haven't considered any expression for polynomial, so let us take this itself, a naught plus a1x plus etc. plus anx to the power n and mu x equal to b naught plus b1x etc. plus bn x to the power n are with integer coefficients. Okay, now we are going to use the fact that fx is integer monic. That means the highest term in fx has coefficient 1. The highest term in the product lambda x mu x has coefficient ANBM from we get ANBM equal to 1 by equating coefficients of the highest terms. Since AN and BN are integer, oh, they can be negative integers also. Did not think about that. So in that case, oh, okay. Since an and bm are integers, we have either both of them equal to 1 or both of them equal to -1. The first case is quite easy. If an and bm are both equal to 1, then where lambda x and mu x are both, already they had integer coefficients, but now their leading coefficients are both equal to 1, so they are integer monic. On the other hand, if both of them are -1, then here we can do a little trick. Fx can also be written as minus lambda x times minus mu x. So for these polynomials, the leading coefficients will be 1 because they were originally -1, we are multiplying by -1, so they now become 1, and so these two polynomials will now be integer monic, where minus lambda x comma minus mu x are integer monic. Yes, so this completes the proof of the corollary. Okay, now we have come to the stage where we can address the main issue of this chapter. I mean this section, not chapter. Chapter is rings. So in this section we are mainly concerned about polynomials with integer coefficients and their reducibility or irreducibility over the field of rational numbers, you can say like that. Now there are very few results that actually give us conditions under which a given polynomial is reducible or irreducible. One of those results was discovered by Gauss's student Ferdinand Eisenstein. So a criterion is there named after him. So that is the final result of this section. So let us see the Eisenstein criterion. So this is theorem. At first glance this may look like Einstein, but don't make that mistake. Okay, the Eisenstein criterion, and the criterion is this: let fx equal to be a polynomial with integer coefficients. So that means all the AIs are integers. Let there exist a prime. I think I need ink. Give me a moment. Let there exist a prime number P such that P divides all the coefficients except the leading one, that is P divides A0, A1, A2, etc. P divides an minus 1, but P does not divide an, and additionally P square does not divide the constant term a0. If these things are true, then fx is irreducible over the rationals. That means you will not be able to write fx as a product of two polynomials with rational coefficients, both of whose degrees are positive. Okay, so this is Eisenstein's criterion. So let us now look at the proof. Or we can start the proof here itself. In the very beginning, right off the bat, we can make an assumption, and that assumption is that the content of our original polynomial is 1. In other words, this polynomial is a primitive polynomial. Let us first write the assumption and then we will try to justify it. Without loss of generality, we assume that fx is primitive. Now, how can we make such an assumption? You see, fx is a polynomial with integer coefficients. That is fine, but the coefficients are also rational numbers. So you can consider fx as an element in this polynomial ring. Now, what is the meaning of this assumption? Without loss of generality, we are assuming that fx is primitive. If fx is not primitive, then we are replacing fx with its primitive version by dividing the polynomial by its content. And then proving the theorem for this polynomial, which is a primitive polynomial. That means the way we have started the proof, actually the proof is being done only for primitive polynomials, but clearly that does not cover all the polynomials. But does the proof cover all the polynomials? That is the question. We have written without loss of generality. Say instead of a general fx whose content d may be greater than 1, you have started with a primitive version of the original polynomial, and you prove Eisenstein's criterion for this polynomial, and you prove that this is irreducible. Say, will this irreducibility imply that fx is also irreducible? That is the question. Now look at this polynomial ring. Recall that in our when we started solving the exercises in the previous section, we proved one result, namely that in any such polynomial ring where f can be any field, the units in this ring are precisely the non-zero elements of f. They are the units. So just like that, here the units in this ring are precisely the non-zero rational numbers. But why am I talking about units? You will see. In a general Euclidean ring, if E is a Euclidean ring and say P is a prime element in E, then if you multiply this prime element by a unit U, the product UP is again a prime element. We have already discussed this when we studied Euclidean rings. In fact, there we discussed that once you get a greatest common divisor of two elements, then multiplying the GCD by any unit gives you other GCDs. Just like that, if you multiply a prime element by a unit, you get other prime elements. If you think of this thing in the ring of integers, then you have the ordinary primes that we use in number theory, which are positive. but actually, strictly speaking, thinking of Z as a Euclidean ring, you have other prime elements also, which are the negative primes. They are obtained from these prime elements by multiplying by the unit -1. Just like that, in a general Euclidean ring also, if you multiply by unit, then primality is maintained. Now, irreducible elements in a polynomial ring are just like prime elements, because the definition has come from there only, no? So, if I prove that this is irreducible, then it will imply that this is also irreducible. Why? Because if I multiply this polynomial by the non-zero rational number d, then I get fx, and d being a non-zero rational number is a unit in this polynomial ring. So that's why it's enough to prove the result only for primitive polynomials, not just any polynomials, because from primitivity you can, from primitive polynomials you can then blow the result and spread it to the entirety of all integer polynomials by multiplying the primitive polynomials by some suitable positive integers, or maybe negative integers, because negative integers are also units in QX. There you just have to take their reciprocals. They are also rational numbers, so they are units. That is fine, but there is one more issue. When we are considering in place of such a polynomial a primitive polynomial, that is, we are dividing by the content, what happens to these hypotheses? Are the hypotheses affected? If that is so, then we cannot proceed like this, because then the entire thing changes. No? In the hypothesis, what do we have? P is a prime that divides all these coefficients except the last one, and P square does not divide the constant term. Now, say you take the content of this polynomial out. Say you have like this. A naught is, say, d times b naught plus a1 is d times b1 x, this is db2 x square plus dbn x to the power n, where d is the content of fx. In other words, d is the greatest common divisor of all the ai's. Now we are not talking about p, okay, p is there in the background, we are just talking about the content of this polynomial, okay. Now you take the content out, and in fact you divide the polynomial by the content to have a primitive polynomial, and this is the primitive polynomial. These hypotheses that were true for the original polynomial are similar hypotheses true for this polynomial. Let us see. Note that P does not divide D. This P cannot divide the content D. Why? Because dBn is equal to an. So if P divides D, then P will also divide an, contradicting this hypothesis. So P cannot divide D. But P divides all the the coefficients, that is P divides AI, where I lies between 1 and n minus 1, and this ai is actually equal to d bi. So for this variation of I, since p is a prime and p does not divide d, so p has to divide bi. So that means p divides b naught, b1, b2, etc. all the way up to bn minus 1. Can p divide bn? No, because if p divides bn, then p again divides an, which is not allowed. So p does not divide bn. Can p square divide b naught? No, because d b naught is equal to a naught. If p square divides b naught, then p square also divides a naught, contradicting this one, this hypothesis. So the same similar hypotheses are also available for the primitive version of the polynomial. So all the things are okay. We are allowed to write without loss of generality. However, we must mention these things, at least to the extent it has been mentioned in the text and the author uses this language. For taking out the greatest common divisor of the coefficients does not disturb the hypothesis. Since p does not divide an, the author seems to have concentrated only on the fact that the hypotheses are not disturbed. However, the fact that it's enough to prove the result only for primitive polynomials, it automatically follows that the result is true for all polynomials. That he has not mentioned anything about that Hartstein. However, I think that is quite easy to understand. So that's why he hasn't said anything. Okay. Now our aim is to show that fx is irreducible over the rationals, and we are going to suppose the contrary and then try to arrive at a contradiction. So now our fx is primitive. So if fx factors as a product of two non-constant polynomials, we don't have to consider the non-constantness right now. So if fx factors as a product of two polynomials having rational coefficients Gauss lemma implies that it factors as a product of two polynomials with integer coefficients. Yes. Thus, if we suppose that fx is reducible over the field of rationals, then fx can be written like this. B naught plus b1x etc. plus br x to the power r times another such polynomial, say c naught plus c1x plus cs x to the power s, where r and s are both positive, b naught, b1 etc., br, c naught, c1 etc. to cs are integers, and br and cs are non-zero, so that the degree of fx becomes r, the degree of this polynomial becomes r and the degree of the second factor becomes s, where both r and s are greater than 0, giving us the fact that this factorization is in fact non-trivial. Note, however, that where are we getting this factorization from? We are getting it from Gauss-Lemma, which says that if fx can be written as ux times vx, where ux and vx are rational polynomials, then they can also be factored like this as lambda x times mu x, where lambda x and mu x are integer polynomials. However, if you go to the proof of Gauss's lemma, you can see that after clearing of denominators and taking common terms out, from ux you are getting lambda x and from vx you are getting mu x. The degrees are not affected. So our supposition that fx is reducible over q will give us what actually? You will be able to write fx as ux times vx, where these are polynomials with rational coefficients, but each one of them has positive degree. None of them is a constant. Okay, and after clearing of denominator and taking out common terms, you get mu x and lambda x. However, the degrees are not changed. The degree of lambda x continues to be the degree of ux, and the degree of mu x continues to be the degree of vx. So that's why they are also not constant. They have positive degrees. That's why we are able to choose r and s to be positive. Okay, so we have come this far. Now, our original polynomial fx is given to be a naught plus a1x and so on. So there the constant term is a naught. If you multiply these two polynomials, the constant term here will be b naught c naught. So from that we have a naught equal to b naught c naught. Now you recall the hypothesis. Since p divides a naught, we have p dividing b naught c naught, and so p divides b naught or p divides c naught. This comes from the fact that p is a prime number. So if it divides a product of two integers, it has to divide at least one of them. Also, since, but at the same time we also have this thing, p square does not divide a naught. Both p dividing b naught and p dividing c naught cannot be true, because if both of them are true, then p square will divide b naught c naught. That means p square will divide a naught, contradicting this part of the hypothesis. Assume, so both of them cannot be true. So let us assume p divides b naught and p does not divide c naught. Okay. Okay. Now we are going to make this observation. Not all the coefficients b0, b1 up to br are divisible by p. But why? If p divides all of these coefficients, that means p will divide all the coefficients of fx, that means all the ai's. Why? Because if all the bi's are multiples of p, after you multiply these two polynomials, collect terms and form the polynomial fx, the coefficients, all of them will have multiples of p. Even their sums will also be multiples of p. So all the coefficients will then divide, then be divisible by p, contradicting the hypothesis that fx is actually a primitive polynomial. So because otherwise p will divide all the coefficients of fx contradicting its primitivity. Okay, so p does not divide all the bi, so that means there will be a smallest integer, smallest non-negative integer, for which the corresponding b will also not be divisible by p. Let k be the smallest non-negative integer such that P does not divide Bk. Now we calculate AK. Calculate AK in the sense that since fx now is a product of lambda x and bx, oh sorry, not lambda x and bx, this polynomial and the previous one. So we can calculate AK. In fact, we can, what I am trying to say is that after you perform this product, you will have one coefficient in the kth term, or in the term where x to the power k occurs. That coefficient will be equal to AK. So that's what I mean when I am saying that we are going to calculate AK. P does not divide Bk. Oh, we cannot actually we need not take k to be non-negative because P already divides B naught. So instead, let us consider like this. Let k be the smallest integer such that k is greater than 0, k definitely is less than or equal to r, and r is less than n, and P does not divide Bk. Let us make the inequalities clear. K cannot be 0 because P already divides B naught. That comes from the hypothesis. So k has to be greater than 0. Since k is a suffix of B, the maximum possible value of k is r. And why is r less than n? R is less than n because s is greater than 0. Okay. N is the degree of that polynomial fx, and fx is this product, this times another polynomial of degree r. So r plus s is equal to n. Since both s and r are positive, so none of them can be equal to n, because in that case other would have to be equal to 0. So r is strictly less than n. Now AK is equal to we know what this expression is, but will it be written in a special form? No. Okay, so let us just simply write what it is. Bk c naught plus Bk minus 1 c1. Let's write one more term. Bk minus 2 c2, etc. plus B naught ck. Now k is the smallest integer for which p does not divide bk. So for small suffix values which are smaller than k, p will divide the corresponding b's. That means p divides bk minus 1, bk minus 2, all of these things. Since p divides b naught, b1, bk minus 2, bk minus 1, and at the same time p also divides ak. How do we know that p divides ak? Keep in mind that p divides the original coefficients. Okay, p divides the original coefficients ai, all of them except the last one, an. but there is no possibility for k to be equal to n, because k is strictly less than n, so p has to divide ak. Okay, we have, so p divides this thing and p divides all these terms, so p must divide bk c naught. This implies p divides bk or p divides c naught. However, we have p does not divide bk, this we have here itself, and the fact that p does not divide c naught, see here, and this contradiction stems from supposition that fx is reducible over q. This happens when we assume this, that p divides b naught but p does not divide c naught. The other assumption, where p does not divide b naught and p divides c naught, can be similarly handled. A similar contradiction arises from the assumption that p does not divide b naught and p divides c naught. So that is also false, and hence or instead of, okay, this is a little not correct. After this you write this. A similar contradiction arises from the assumption this. So our supposition that fx is reducible over q is wrong. That means fx must be irreducible over q. That is Eisenstein's criterion. Okay, while arguing here, did I think I said something wrong. At one point, I can't remember clearly, p divides, how am I getting these things? I am getting these things from the fact that k is the smallest integer such that p does not divide b. Okay, no, there is no problem. I was thinking of something else. I thought that I mixed up the hypothesis about ak with the bk's. No, that's not what I did. So this completes the proof of Eisenstein's criterion, and it completes the text part of this section. After this we have exercises, and in the exercises we will see how we can use the different ideas in this section to conclude irreducibility or reducibility of polynomials, and we will also see applications of the Eisenstein criterion. So with this I end this video. So see you in the other video. Okay.